What would you do if you walked into a room full of Ivy League elites and everyone looked at you like you didn't belong before you even said a single word? Imagine walking into a room where every face seems to say, "You don't belong here." That was Jasmine Carter's first day at Yale. 17 years old, straight from the 7th Ward of New Orleans, Jasmine had never stepped foot on an Ivy League campus before. Her suitcase was second-hand, her blazer faded at the edges, and her sneakers, the kind people silently judged. But none of that stopped her from walking through the towering stone archways of Yale's debate hall, heart-pounding, notebook clutched tight to her chest. This was the National Debate Invitational, the most elite high school competition in the country. Only the top 1% were invited. Students from San Francisco prep schools, New York's Upper East Side, private academies with debate coaches, scholarships, and reputations older than Jasmine's entire neighborhood. She wasn't supposed to be here, but here she was. And standing at the front of the room was Preston Whitmore, tall, blonde, Yale legacy, and son of a senator. He wore a navy blazer that looked tailored, shoes that probably cost more than Jasmine's entire wardrobe. When he spotted her standing at the back, his smile curled into something sharper. "Who let the community volunteers in?" he said loudly, pretending to ask the professor, but making sure everyone heard. Laughter rippled through his circle of perfectly polished peers. Jasmine didn't flinch. She'd grown up hearing worse. Instead, she looked to the front of the room, where Professor Helen Blake was reviewing the speaker schedule. The woman was a legend, cold, brilliant, and known for shredding even the most confident speakers to pieces. Her gaze scanned the room with practiced indifference. It paused only briefly on Jasmine, not long enough to smile, just long enough to notice and dismiss. The day was meant for icebreakers, though it felt more like open season on underdogs. Students formed small clusters showing off resumes like war medals, Ivy-bound, 4-time champion. Internship at the mayor's office. Jasmine stood alone, flipping through the pages of her battered debate journal, every page filled with handwritten rebuttals and underlined quotes, many of them drafted late at night, sitting on the kitchen floor with her mum, Angela Carter, after a double shift at the diner. She could still hear her mum's voice in her head. "You don't have to outdress them, baby. Just outthink them." But it wasn't easy. Not in a room like this. Not when every glance, every whisper, seemed to remind her she was a mistake, an afterthought in someone else's spotlight. And then, just to twist the knife, Preston called out again, "Hey, Professor, are we letting in open mic night now?" More laughter. Jasmine's neck flushed. She felt the heat rise to her ears. But before she could say anything, a voice cut through the noise, crisp, commanding. "That's enough, Mr. Whitmore," said Professor Blake. Silence. Preston gave a theatrical bow, pretending to be chastised, but the smirks didn't fade. Neither did the sting. Later that afternoon, the students gathered in the main lecture hall. Professor Blake announced the first elimination round topic. Resolved, the role of socioeconomic background in university admissions should be minimized. Jasmine's heart skipped. Of all the topics, she didn't just understand this argument, she lived it. While others began exchanging notes and forming study pods, Jasmine found a quiet corner in the back of the library. No one invited her to join their group. No one even looked her way. She didn't care. She powered up her old laptop, the one she and her mum bought off Craigslist, and dove deep. She pulled Supreme Court rulings. She researched statistics about Yale's admissions. She took notes on historic patterns of legacy bias and structural inequality. She wasn't just preparing for a debate. She was preparing for a reckoning. And just before midnight, her phone buzzed with a message from her mom. "You got this, Jasmine. Make them listen." That night, something shifted inside her. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was quiet conviction. The kind that doesn't need permission. The kind that doesn't back down. The next morning, The skies over Yale were grey, heavy with autumn. The campus buzzed with tension and subtle condescension. Jasmine's name was listed last on the speaker roster, the kind of placement meant for people no one expects to remember. Preston Whitmore, of course, went first. He took the stage like it was his, spoke with perfect diction, the confidence of someone who'd been winning his whole life. He told stories of his father's journey, layered with statistics and just the right amount of charm. The judges nodded. The room applauded. Jasmine listened carefully. Not to be impressed, but to prepare. One by one, more students spoke, each polished, each rehearsed. And then, her name echoed awkwardly across the hall. Next speaker, Jasmine Carter. Representing New Orleans, Southeast Regional. A beat of silence. Then whispers. She stood, slowly. Her shoes squeaked on the floor as she walked past the rows of students, many of whom turned to whisper behind cupped hands. She placed her journal on the podium, fingers trembling. Then she adjusted the mic and spoke. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Yale for this invitation, even if some people in this room believe I shouldn't be here. A wave of gasps. And she didn't pause, not once. She spoke about broken schools in her neighborhood with no functioning AC. She referenced federal data on systemic barriers. She quoted court rulings, then looked directly at Preston when she said, "Some of us weren't born with legacy admission letters waiting for us. Some of us had to earn every single invitation, including this one." No one laughed. No one smirked. The room fell into a silence so sharp, it hurt. When she finished, her voice didn't waver. She stepped down slowly. The applause was sparse, but real. And as she walked back to her seat, Preston muttered just loud enough, "Cute speech. Let's see if it matters." But Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't look back. Because in that moment, she knew something had shifted. The applause faded quickly. Not because Jasmine Carter had done poorly, but because she had done too well for their comfort. She walked off stage with her head high, but her heart pounding. Her hands still trembled from the weight of what she had just said. The room had been silent, not from boredom or pity, but because they'd been forced to listen. And for some of them, that was uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, the preliminary scores were posted. Jasmine hesitated before approaching the board, afraid of what she might find. She had poured her entire soul into that speech, but this was Yale, and she knew talent wasn't always enough to level the playing field. She scanned the rankings, heart thudding in her chest. Top 16 advance. Her eyes darted down the list. Jasmine Carter, ranked 12. A sharp breath escaped her lips. Relief washed over her like a tide. She hadn't just survived, she had advanced. Then came the voice she knew too well. "Well, look at that," Preston Whitmore drawled behind her. Miracles really do happen. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. More whispers followed as she walked away. "Wait, who is she again?" "She's from some public school in Louisiana, I think. This has to be a diversity pick." No way she beat Alex or Priya. Jasmine felt the sting of every word, but she didn't let it show, because the only thing louder than their whispers was the voice inside her reminding her why she came. That evening, back in her tiny dorm room, the one assigned to out-of-state participants, Jasmine laid out her notes across the bed. She didn't have a fancy printer, no color-coded tabs, just a stack of handwritten research, highlighters, and an aging laptop held together with tape. An email notification pinged. Next round topic. Resolved affirmative action policies do more harm than good. The irony hit her like a slap. They were asking her to either defend or attack the very policy that might have been the only reason people thought she was even invited. She stared at the screen for a long time. What if they were right? What if she was here because of a checkbox? What if her next speech would be the one to prove she didn't belong after all? Her phone buzzed. A text from her mum. "Remember, baby, you've never needed anyone's permission to be great." Jasmine smiled a little, then took a deep breath and got to work. She didn't just prepare one side of the argument, she prepared both. She pulled academic studies, legal cases, graduation statistics, student testimonies. She watched TED Talks and downloaded law review articles. If they tried to trap her with a tricky position, she'd already know every possible exit. She wasn't just debating now, she was arming herself. The next morning, the Yale debate hall felt colder. Jasmine sat near the back, gripping her notes. Preston Whitmore, again, went first. He strode to the podium like a man with nothing to prove. His speech was sharp, witty, and dripping with polished sarcasm. "We should admit students based on merit," he declared, glancing at Jasmine. "Not on sympathy or social engineering." The audience chuckled. The judges nodded. Jasmine's grip on her notes tightened. But her jaw didn't clench. Her shoulders didn't rise. She just breathed in and waited. Her name was called. She rose slowly, walked past rows of skeptics, and stood at the same podium where Preston had just stood. Her voice was calm, controlled. "This conversation isn't about lowering standards," she began. "It's about acknowledging that the playing field hasn't been level for a very long time." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She spoke of legacy admissions, how Yale admitted generations of the same wealthy families. She quoted research showing that more than 60% of elite university students came from the top 10% of income brackets. Then she paused, looked straight into the audience. "If you believe grades and test scores alone determine worth," she said, "ask yourself, how many of you would be sitting here without private tutors, without college counselors, without parents who knew how to game the system before you could even spell SAT?" The room shifted. Some jaws tightened. A few eyes flicked downward. Preston's smirk, the one he always wore like armor, began to twitch. Jasmine closed with quiet, steady power. Leveling the playing field isn't about giving anyone a free pass. It's about ensuring that the next generation of thinkers and leaders doesn't all look exactly like the last. When she stepped down, the applause came quicker this time. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Even Professor Helen Blake, stone-faced, impossible to read Professor Blake, watched her with a gaze that wasn't indifference anymore. It was recognition. The next morning, Jasmine's name appeared again. This time, she wasn't at the bottom of the list, ranked 7th, higher than anyone expected. Higher than even some of the prepped-for-years private school favorites. She stared at the paper, not smiling, just absorbing. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a fluke. She was still standing, but as she walked to the dining hall, she noticed 2 boys from Preston's circle near the bulletin board, whispering and laughing. She caught only one line as she passed. "Let's see how she handles tomorrow's topic." Something twisted in her gut. That night, as she sat down to start her prep for the quarterfinals, an email arrived. Subject: revised topic assignment, urgent, from adminale@ivydebate.org. Jasmine opened it. "Due to a scheduling conflict, your assigned topic has been changed. Please prepare the following resolution. Resolved. The American education system rewards conformity over creativity. Failure to comply will result in disqualification." Her stomach dropped. None of the other competitors had mentioned a topic change. She double-checked the official schedule. Nothing had changed. Still, the email looked real. But something in her gut whispered, "This is wrong." She didn't have time to investigate. She had 10 hours to scrap everything and start over. So she did. No tears, no complaining. Just coffee, research, and fire in her eyes. The storm was coming, but Jasmine Carter had already survived worse. And she wasn't going anywhere. Jasmine Carter hadn't slept much. The urgent topic change email had stolen her night. She'd rewritten her entire speech from scratch, pivoting from affirmative action to the idea that the American education system punished creativity. It was a sharp turn, but she'd made it work, or so she thought. When she arrived at the debate hall the next morning, her notes clutched tightly in one hand and her laptop in the other, she barely had time to breathe before she heard her name. "Miss Carter?" Professor Helen Blake's voice was clipped, disapproving. "Where have you been?" Jasmine blinked. "I've been prepping for the topic change." Professor Blake's brow furrowed. "What topic change?" Jasmine pulled out her phone and showed the email. Blake scanned it, her lips tightening. "This didn't come from the committee," she said sharply. "This is fake." And then Jasmine's world tilted, her stomach dropped. Her hands trembled. Who would do this? She didn't even finish the question. Because behind her, near the doorway, Preston Whitmore leaned casually against the wall, and when their eyes met, he gave her a small, smug smile. Then he mouthed something across the room, silently. Oops. It hit Jasmine like ice water to the spine. She'd been set up. While the others prepped the real topic, resolved. Technology has eroded authentic human communication. She'd spent all night researching the wrong issue. She had 5 minutes. No outline. No quotes. No data. Just panic. Jasmine had 2 options. Walk out or walk up. And somewhere buried under exhaustion, shame and fury came her mother's voice. "You didn't come this far to fold now, baby." So Jasmine grabbed a blank notepad and a pen. She sprinted to the back of the room and scribbled furiously. Technology, communication, erosion of connection. What did she know? Not from Google, but from life. She wrote, social media replacing real friends, phones at dinner tables, texts that replaced conversations, her classmates more worried about snap streaks than eye contact. 5 minutes. That's all she had. When her name was called, her hands were shaking, her throat dry. She stepped up to the podium, pages barely filled. She took one breath and began. "I don't have statistics for you today," she said, voice low but steady. "Because I didn't come here to sound smart. I came here to be honest." That got attention. The judges looked up. Preston cocked his head, mildly amused. "Where I come from, people used to sit on porches and talk for hours. Now we sit next to each other and text across the couch." A ripple of reaction moved through the room. Jasmine kept going, building her speech not on polish, but truth. She described how even in school, conversations had been replaced by emojis, how kids would rather record a moment than actually live it. She didn't quote famous authors. She quoted her little cousin, who once said, "Why talk when I can text?" She wasn't perfect. Her voice cracked once. She lost her place for a moment, but it didn't matter, because the audience felt her. Her speech was raw, unscripted, real. When she stepped down, the applause was hesitant, but not dismissive. And for the first time since arriving at Yale, Professor Helen Blake didn't look unimpressed. She looked intrigued. Preston's smile faltered just slightly. That night, back in her room, Jasmine stared at her laptop. No new messages. No new threats, but her guard stayed up. This was more than a competition now. It was a game, and she'd just shown she could play too. The next morning she sat outside the debate hall, sipping lukewarm coffee from a vending machine. The autumn wind bit through her thrift store blazer, but her mind was sharp, alert. Her phone buzzed. Quarter-final results. Posted. Jasmine stood quickly and walked to the bulletin board, her breath fogging in the air. She scanned the rankings. Jasmine Carter, rank 5, advancing to semifinals. Her mouth opened slightly in shock. Even after sabotage, even after everything, she'd made it. From bottom seed to semifinals. Behind her, voices murmured. One girl said, "How is she still in this?" Another muttered, "There's no way, that was just luck." And Preston? He stood nearby, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching her name climb higher. That afternoon, Jasmine sat in the library, reviewing notes for the semi-final topic. She didn't trust emails anymore. So she double-checked with the committee. Resolved. Social movements driven by digital activism are less effective than traditional grassroots organizing. Perfect. This was her world. She opened tabs on the Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, post-Katrina activism. She didn't just understand digital movements. She lived in the echoes of them. Online petitions had helped save her school library. Hashtag campaigns had brought relief aid to her neighborhood. Her uncle's fundraiser, created on a smartphone, had paid for his roof after the hurricane. Jasmine didn't just have arguments, she had proof. But even as she typed, something in her chest twisted. She didn't trust the silence. This place, this system didn't like girls like her rising. And yet, that was exactly what she was doing. In the shadows, someone had tried to erase her. But Jasmine Carter wasn't here to disappear. She was here to be heard. And now, all of Yale was listening. The library was silent, but Jasmine Carter's mind was on fire. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, tabs open to case studies on digital activism, the Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, even Hurricane Katrina recovery efforts. She cross-referenced them with voter data, donation spikes, and congressional mentions. She was building not just a speech, but a weapon. This was the semi-final, and the topic couldn't have fit her better. Resolved. Social movements driven by digital activism are less effective than traditional grassroots organizing. To some, it was a dry policy prompt. To Jasmine, it was personal. Digital activism had helped save her neighborhood. After Katrina, online campaigns were the only reason her school library reopened. When her uncle lost everything in the storm, a Facebook fundraiser paid to fix his roof. This wasn't theory. This was home. Across campus, others prepped with private coaches and group sessions. Jasmine? She sat alone with a vending machine, coffee, and a laptop that wheezed every time she opened another tab. And still, she was winning. But as she worked late into the night, a familiar chill crept in, not from the autumn wind outside the library windows, but from memory. The email, the fake topic, the setup. Someone had gone out of their way to make her fail, and no one had been held accountable. Yet. The next morning, Jasmine walked into the semi-final hall with her head high. But she wasn't naive. She'd earned her spot and her enemies. Her opponent, Samantha Chen. Top-ranked, polished, privileged. And exactly the kind of competitor the judges adored. Samantha gave Jasmine a polite smile before they took the stage. It wasn't warm. It wasn't hostile. It was strategic. The moderator introduced them. Cameras lined the back wall. This round was being filmed for Yale's debate archive. Jasmine didn't care. She wasn't here to look good. She was here to speak truth. Samantha opened the round with precision. She laid out an argument that digital movements lacked follow-through, citing examples of hashtags that fizzled and online outrage that never translated to votes. Her points were clean, her tone even. She spoke like someone who'd practiced this speech 100 times in front of a mirror lined with Ivy League acceptance letters. The judges nodded. They were impressed. And then, it was Jasmine's turn. She stepped up to the podium. No blazer, no flash, just a voice that refused to be ignored. I come from a place where most people don't get heard, not in boardrooms, not in ballots, not even in emergencies. So when the internet gave us a mic, we didn't use it for noise, we used it to survive. The room fell still. Jasmine didn't stop. She told the story of her uncle, how FEMA failed him, but strangers online didn't. She cited studies showing how online petitions had led to real policy changes. She quoted testimony from youth activists who never had a lawn to plant signs in but had Twitter and used it like fire. Digital activism isn't less powerful, it's just less comfortable for people used to holding the megaphone. Her voice caught just once when she spoke of losing her cousin to a senseless act of violence, and how the only justice her family ever got came through an online campaign that forced the city to investigate. She didn't cry. She just kept going. By the time she stepped down, even Samantha looked shaken. The applause was slow, then grew. Professor Helen Blake sat in the corner, arms folded, watching not just with interest, but with something else. Respect. Later that day, the results were announced. The winner, advancing to the final round, Jasmine Carter. She blinked, barely believing it. From the girl who shouldn't be here, to finalist, from whispered mockery to thunderous respect. But as Jasmine stepped off stage, she heard a voice low, sharp, familiar. "Be ready," said Professor Blake, pulling her aside. "The next round won't just test your skill." Jasmine frowned. "What does that mean?" Blake didn't answer. She didn't have to, because just a few steps away, leaning against the far wall, with arms crossed and eyes cold, was Preston Whitmore. He wasn't smiling. Not anymore. That evening, as the sun dipped below the old Gothic towers of Yale, Jasmine sat on the steps outside the lecture hall. Her notebook rested in her lap, but she wasn't writing. She was remembering every laugh, every doubt, every fake email, every time someone said she didn't belong, and then she smiled. Not because it was over, but because it wasn't. Because the final round wasn't just about arguments or rankings. It was about proving that a girl from the 7th Ward of New Orleans could walk into the heart of the Ivy League and take up space. And no one, not even Preston Whitmore, was going to take that from her now. The morning of the final round arrived colder than any day before. Grey clouds hung low over Yale's campus, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Inside Sanders Auditorium, the seats filled faster than usual. Not just with students, but with faculty, alumni, even a few local reporters. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a story. The outsider versus the heir. Jasmine Carter versus Preston Whitmore. The girl from a public high school in New Orleans, scuffed sneakers, thrifted blazer against the polished golden boy of Yale's elite circle. Jasmine sat backstage, flipping through her notebook, heart pounding. She whispered her points under her breath, like prayers. She didn't have anyone with her. No coach. No team. Just her and everything she carried. Across the room, Preston paced in slow practice circles, surrounded by his usual crowd. They gave him high fives. He smirked, flexed his shoulders, adjusted his collar like he'd already won. Jasmine caught pieces of his voice. "Easy win. She'll fold in cross-exam. She's not built for this level." She didn't respond, because her mother's voice was louder in her head than his. "You don't need their permission to shine, baby." The moderator walked out onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final round of the Yale National Invitational." He paused for effect as the audience leaned forward. Representing the Yale Honors Division, Preston Whitmore. Applause erupted, loud, predictable. And representing the Southeast Regional Public Forum, Jasmine Carter. The room shifted. Polite claps, surprised faces. A few students from earlier rounds stood, hands together, quiet but sincere. Jasmine stepped onto the stage. The screen behind the debaters displayed the resolution. Resolved. Traditional institutions remain the best guardians of academic integrity. Jasmine almost laughed. The irony was rich. She wasn't just debating the resolution, she was living the contradiction. Preston went first. His speech was airtight. He painted Yale as the noble gatekeeper of truth and tradition. He cited studies, quoted philosophers, and name-dropped former secretaries of education. His tone was effortless, almost rehearsed. The crowd nodded along. The judges smiled. He was doing everything right. Then it was Jasmine's turn. She walked to the podium. No theatrics, no entourage. Just her. "We're here to debate who gets to decide what integrity looks like," she began, voice low but firm. "And I stand here as proof that sometimes the institutions we trust are the first to silence voices like mine." The room stiffened. She didn't pause. She spoke of the fake email without naming names and how someone had tried to manipulate the rules to push her out. She referenced Yale's history of exclusion, of closed doors, of long-held patterns that favored the privileged and punished the different. "Integrity isn't just about preserving tradition," she said. "It's about evolving past the traditions that shut people out." When Preston returned for cross-examination, he came in sharp, aggressive. He interrupted, pressed, twisted definitions. But Jasmine didn't flinch. "You're shifting the argument again, Mr. Whitmore," she said calmly. "Let's return to the resolution." That line sent a murmur through the audience. Even the judges leaned forward. She wasn't just holding her ground, she was controlling the floor. In her rebuttal, Jasmine dismantled Preston's logic piece by piece. "If traditional institutions are the best guardians of integrity," she said, "then explain why I had to fight sabotage, just to stand here." Silence. For the first time, Preston didn't smile. When the debate ended, the crowd didn't just applaud, they rose. This wasn't pity. This was power. Jasmine stepped back from the podium, hands trembling slightly. Professor Helen Blake, who hadn't clapped for anyone all week, gave her the faintest nod, a silent acknowledgement. Backstage, Jasmine sat on a bench, breathing deep. Her palms were sweaty, her chest tight. She wasn't thinking about victory. She was thinking about her mum back home, her uncle, the kids in her neighborhood who had never even heard of Yale. "I made them listen," she whispered. Preston sat a few feet away. "No more jokes, just silence." The door opened. Professor Blake appeared. "The results will be announced in 5 minutes," she said. Jasmine stood, straightened her shoulders. She was ready. No matter what the envelope said, Jasmine Carter had already won something no trophy could define. She had belonged on that stage, and no one would ever forget it. The room held its breath. The moderator stood center stage with a sealed envelope in his hands, milking the suspense like a reality show finale. Cameras flashed from the back row. Students leaned forward. Preston Whitmore tapped his foot, arms crossed. Jasmine Carter sat still, heart racing, but face calm. After much deliberation, the moderator announced, "The winner of the 2025 Yale National Invitational is..." A beat. A pause. A moment that lasted forever. Jasmine Carter. For a split second, no one moved. Then a ripple of surprise and applause spread through the room. Not thunderous, not unanimous, but real, respectful, loud enough to drown out the whispers that had haunted her all week. Jasmine blinked. She stood slowly, almost unsure if she'd heard right. Preston didn't wait. He grabbed his bag and stormed off the stage without a word. Jasmine didn't follow him with her eyes. She was looking at the faces in the crowd, some stunned, some smiling, some recording her every move. She saw students she'd never spoken to clapping, even a few professors. And then she saw Professor Helen Blake standing off to the side, arms folded. Blake gave a slow, small nod. Jasmine stepped forward to shake the moderator's hand. "You didn't just win," he whispered. "You moved them." As the cameras swirled around her and the crowd buzzed, her phone vibrated. A message from home, from her mom, Angela Carter. "Told you, baby." You never needed their permission to shine. That's when Jasmine finally smiled. Not the nervous smile she wore at registration, not the forced smile during introductions, but a real one. Wide, open, proud. For the first time in days, she let herself feel it. Later that evening, Jasmine sat alone on the steps outside the debate hall, still in her blazer, medal tucked into her backpack. The night air was crisp. The stone beneath her was cold, but something inside her burned bright. She heard footsteps. Professor Blake sat down beside her, silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. "I thought you should know. The administration found out who sent the fake email." Jasmine's body stiffened. She turned to Blake, barely breathing. "Who?" she asked. Blake didn't hesitate. "Preston Whitmore." The name landed like a final gavel. He spoofed the address to make it look official. Covered his tracks, but he wasn't as smart as he thought. Jasmine exhaled slowly. "Is he being expelled?" Blake shook her head. "This is Yale. We protect reputations before we protect students. Officially, it's under review. Unofficially, he's done. No more national tournaments. No more championship recommendations. His record's tainted." Jasmine looked down at her hands. "I didn't want it to end like that," she whispered. Blake glanced sideways at her, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Then you're already more mature than most people I know." They sat there in silence a while longer. Blake stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, you didn't just win because you were good. You won because you were better, and you made it impossible for them to pretend otherwise." Then she was gone. 2 weeks later, back in New Orleans, Jasmine sat on her porch as the sun set over her neighborhood. She sipped sweet tea from a mason jar, notebook open beside her. Her mom stepped outside, holding an envelope with a Yale letterhead. Jasmine opened it carefully. Inside, an official invitation to join Yale's prestigious pre-orientation summer program with a full scholarship. Tucked inside the folder was a handwritten note. "Can't wait to see how far you'll go. Professor Helen Blake." Jasmine smiled, not because it was easy, but because it had been worth it. She looked out across the street, where a group of neighborhood kids played basketball barefoot, and thought, "They're gonna know that someone from here didn't just make it." She rewrote the rules. Jasmine Carter didn't walk into the final round of the Yale Invitational expecting it to be fair. She walked in, expecting it to be theirs. The kind of stage built for kids like Preston Whitmore, polished, prepped and passed down generation after generation. The kind of stage that felt like a second home to them, and a warning sign to girls like her. But Jasmine wasn't here to play by their rules. She was here to break them. The auditorium was packed. Reporters lined the back wall. Alumni filled the front row, many of them with crossed arms and raised eyebrows as they looked at her name on the bracket beside Preston's. "It's a nice story," one whispered, "but she won't survive the final." Backstage, Jasmine adjusted her collar, flipped open her notebook, and breathed deeply. She could hear Preston joking with someone behind the curtain. "She's got nothing left. She cracked once already." "I'm just going to bury her in cross-exam." She didn't respond. She didn't even look up. Because Preston didn't realize something. Jasmine had already survived everything he was afraid of. The debate topic appeared on the massive projector screen above them. Resolved. Traditional institutions remain the best guardians of academic integrity. Jasmine smiled not out of comfort but out of clarity. This wasn't a prompt. This was exactly the fight she came for. Preston opened the round. He painted a picture of elite institutions as protectors of truth, rigor, and standards. He quoted historical figures. He cited rankings, studies, articles by Yale alumni. He said the word merit like it was a magical spell. And the audience nodded. Some even smiled. When he finished, he straightened his blazer and sat down with the ease of a boy who'd been winning rooms like this since kindergarten. Then came Jasmine. No designer suit, no legacy name. No famous citations, just her. She stepped up to the podium, notebook in hand, and began. "We are told that institutions are the guardians of integrity. But I want to ask, integrity for who?" She paused. just long enough for the words to land. Because I've been here for a week, and I've seen exactly what these institutions protect. They protect tradition, they protect familiarity, they protect people like Preston. You could hear the breath catch in the room. She didn't stop. They don't protect students like me, students who had to fight just to get a foot in the door, who had to claw our way into rooms we were never invited to, who had to earn every ounce of credibility that others inherited. Gasps. Silence. She looked directly at Preston when she said, "And when someone tried to sabotage me by sending a fake topic to derail my chances, this institution didn't protect me either. I protected myself." The room froze. Even the judges exchanged glances. Preston leaned back in his chair, his fingers clenched tightly together. In cross-examination, Preston came in hot. He interrupted. He questioned her sources. He tried to spin the argument toward policy definitions and theoretical frameworks. But Jasmine stayed cool. "You're not debating me," she said softly. "You're debating a reality you've never lived." That line, delivered without anger, only truth stopped him cold. Her rebuttal was the final blow. Integrity is not inherited. It's not framed in mahogany and hung on ivy-covered walls. It's what you do when no one is watching. And if institutions are not evolving to include the people they've historically excluded, then they're not protecting integrity, they're protecting themselves. Applause, scattered at first, then rising. Not polite, not hesitant, but earned. Preston said little in his closing. He stammered once. His rhythm was off. The audience, the one that had clung to his every word all week, had already turned their ears and hearts to her. As Jasmine stepped down from the podium, she didn't look for approval. She looked toward the back of the auditorium, where students who looked like her students, who never thought they'd belong in a room like this, were standing. She didn't just survive the final, she owned it, and for the first time in Yale's long, polished history, the rules bent towards someone they were never written for. Backstage, Jasmine Carter sat on a cold bench, notebook still in hand, fingers lightly curled around the edge of the cover. Her legs were shaking, but her back stayed straight. Every breath felt like thunder in her chest. Across the hall, Preston Whitmore paced in tight circles. No words, no smiles, no smug commentary, just silence. The judges were still deliberating. Behind the closed doors, the most powerful voices in the room were deciding who would walk out of this tournament as the winner. But for Jasmine, she'd already made peace with whatever was coming, because she had done what she came to do. She didn't crack, she didn't fold, and she didn't let anyone, not even the golden boy of Yale, take her voice away. 5 minutes later, the door opened. Professor Helen Blake stepped out. Her face was neutral, unreadable, as always. "They're ready," she said. Jasmine stood. The walk back into the auditorium felt heavier this time, like she was dragging every moment of the past week behind her. The stares, the whispers, the fake email, the isolation, the rage, the pressure, and the fire she lit beneath it all. The audience buzzed as they re-entered. The moderator stood with the results in hand. The sealed envelope looked thin, insignificant, but inside it carried the weight of two very different worlds. Jasmine took her place on one side of the stage. Preston stood on the other. The moderator cleared his throat. "After an extremely close and passionate debate, the judges have reached a decision." A beat. "The winner of the 2025 Yale National Debate Invitational." Pause. Jasmine's eyes didn't flicker. She didn't pray. She didn't flinch. She just stood there. Is Jasmine Carter? The auditorium held its breath. And then the sound came. Applause. At first from the back, then the middle, then the front. Some students stood. Some simply stared. But one thing was clear. She had done the impossible. Preston didn't wait. He didn't smile. Didn't shake her hand. He turned and walked off stage, eyes down, jaw tight. And just like that, the empire built around him cracked. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't even look after him. She stepped forward slowly to accept the plaque, still gripping her notebook in one hand. The moderator leaned in and whispered, "They'll remember this one." After the ceremony, Jasmine stepped outside into the chilled New Haven evening. Her phone buzzed. A message from home. "Angela Carter, I'm watching the live feed from the porch. Girl, you made the block proud." She laughed quietly. Not from disbelief, but from relief. She had carried her entire neighborhood on her back and never once let them down. Later that night, in the dorm lounge where out-of-state participants stayed, Jasmine curled up in a faded armchair with her medal in her lap. She didn't post a selfie, didn't tweet about her win. Instead, she opened her notes app and began writing. Not for another tournament, not for college admissions, but for herself. A list of every moment she'd stayed standing when others wanted her gone. Every time she rewrote the rules just by showing up. Every lie she'd disproven without shouting. And then she wrote one final line. "I didn't win because they let me. I won because they couldn't stop me." Down the hall, some students still whispered, "She just had a good day." Maybe the judges were trying to make a statement. Let's see if she can do it again. Jasmine heard none of it. She had something they didn't. Not just a trophy, but the knowledge that in the one room where she was never supposed to belong, she made the walls bend. She didn't just win the debate. She won the right to be heard, and for girls like her, that was the greatest victory of all. A few days after the final, Jasmine Carter returned home to New Orleans. There was no parade, no news cameras waiting at the airport, just the familiar smell of the bayou in the air and the low hum of her neighborhood waking up to another morning. But to Jasmine, everything felt different now, because she wasn't coming back as just that quiet girl from the 7th Ward. She was coming back as the girl who made Yale stand still. Word had spread quickly. At the corner store, the cashier nodded and said, "We saw you, baby." At church, Miss Thelma pressed a $5 bill into Jasmine's hand and whispered, "For your next victory." Even the bus driver gave her a free ride and a wink. It wasn't about fame. It was about something deeper. Representation. People weren't clapping for a trophy. They were clapping because someone who looked like them, sounded like them, and came from where they came from walked into a place not built for her and changed it. One afternoon, as the sun hung low over the rooftops, Jasmine sat on the porch with her mum, sipping sweet tea in silence. Angela Carter had been watching the live stream when Jasmine won. She'd seen her daughter straighten her shoulders, heard her quote real life, not textbooks, watched her walk off stage like she'd just cracked a glass ceiling no one even wanted to admit was there. She turned to her daughter. "How does it feel?" she asked gently. Jasmine didn't answer right away. She stared out at the kids on the sidewalk playing tag with bare feet and endless laughter. "It feels like I didn't just speak," Jasmine said finally. "I made people hear what they've been trying not to listen to." Her mother nodded, eyes misty. "You didn't just debate that stage. You belonged to it." A few days later, an envelope arrived in the mail. Yale letterhead, heavy paper. Inside, an official invitation to join the university's pre-orientation summer program, one of the most selective prep opportunities in the Ivy League, and attached to it, a full scholarship. But what caught Jasmine's breath wasn't the offer. It was the handwritten note slipped between the documents. From Professor Helen Blake, "Some people win trophies, others change institutions. You did both. Can't wait to see how far you'll go." Jasmine read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her debate journal right next to her mother's diner receipt from the night before her first round. Proof that both grit and grace could exist on the same page. The next day, Jasmine took a walk through her old high school. The classroom floors still squeaked, the ceiling tiles still had water stains. But a few teachers stopped her in the hall with wide smiles and teary eyes. And when she peeked inside the debate room barely big enough to fit 10 chairs, she saw something that nearly brought her to her knees. Her photo, pinned to the wall. With the words handwritten underneath, she didn't just argue, she made them listen. That night, as cicadas buzzed and porch lights flickered on up and down the block, Jasmine wrote one final note in her journal. If you're reading this, and you're the only one who looks like you in the room, if they laugh when you speak, if they act like you need a permission slip just to stand, don't shrink. Don't wait. Burn the whole room bright with your presence, because some ceilings don't crack until someone like you makes the first sound. She closed the notebook. Not because her story was done, but because the next chapter didn't need to start in a classroom. It would start with her voice. And this time, the world was finally listening. Weeks later, the world had moved on. Debates were being held in other states. Students were prepping for nationals. Ivy League hopefuls were refreshing their Common App profiles. But in a quiet corner of New Orleans, on a porch lined with potted plants and memories, Jasmine Carter was rewriting the next chapter, not for Yale, but for every girl like her who was still waiting to be seen. She'd won the debate, the scholarship, the standing ovation. But Jasmine knew that the real victory wasn't a trophy. It was a shift, a tiny earthquake beneath a system built to ignore voices like hers. One Friday morning, as the mail carrier made his usual rounds, he paused at the Carter house. "Another one," he said, smiling as he handed over a thick envelope. Angela raised an eyebrow and handed it to Jasmine. Inside, an invitation from a national education conference. Keynote speaker, Jasmine Carter. Topic, Reimagining Equity, when students lead the conversation. Jasmine didn't say anything for a long moment. Then quietly she smiled. "They don't just want me to speak now," she whispered. "They want to listen." In the following months, Jasmine would be invited to panels, Zoom forums, university town halls. She never used fancy slides, never opened with jokes. She always started the same way. "I wasn't supposed to be in that room, but I walked in anyway." She didn't lecture. She told the truth. And in doing so, she became a mirror for every underrepresented student who had once looked at Ivy League walls and thought, "That's not for me." Now they were emailing her, DMing her, lining up after her talks to say, "I saw myself in your story. I thought I was alone. Because of you, I'm applying anyway." Yale invited her back for the fall semester, not just as a student in the summer program, but as a mentor for the new debate cohort. She walked those stone paths again, this time with her chin higher, her walk steadier. People recognized her now. Some waved, some nodded politely. But most just watched her in silent respect. One afternoon, as she helped set up a new student orientation, she noticed a young girl in the corner alone, backpack zipped tight, eyes scanning nervously. Jasmine walked over and knelt down beside her. "First time at Yale?" she asked, smiling. The girl nodded. "It's a lot," she whispered. "Feels like I shouldn't be here." Jasmine leaned in close and handed her a folded piece of paper. The girl opened it slowly. Inside were words Jasmine had once written to herself. "You don't need their permission to shine. You were born ready." The girl smiled, not wide, but real. And in that moment, Jasmine saw a reflection of who she used to be and who she had become. That night, Jasmine stood under the same Gothic arches where it all began. The halls were quieter now, the whispers gone. The stairs replaced by space. She wasn't the girl from the 7th Ward who'd walked in with scuffed sneakers and a borrowed blazer anymore. She was the girl who broke the silence. The girl who stood when they hoped she'd fall. The girl who proved that brilliance doesn't come with a pedigree, it comes with purpose. Before she left the courtyard, she turned and looked back at the steps where she once sat alone. And with a voice that had shaken institutions, cracked ceilings, and awakened tradition. She said softly, "I didn't just belong here. I built a door, and I'm leaving it open." Sometimes you don't just win, you make others rethink the rules. Jasmine Carter's journey reminds us that true strength doesn't come from where you start, it comes from how you choose to stand. In a world that often favors the well-connected, she walked into a room built for someone else and earned her place by being unapologetically herself. Her story speaks to anyone who's ever been underestimated, talked over, or told they don't belong. Whether you're 17 or 70, the lesson holds. You don't need permission to be worthy. Jasmine didn't just win a debate. She exposed the quiet ways institutions protect the familiar and ignore the brave. And she did it without shouting, just by telling the truth, clearly and firmly. Let this be a reminder. Integrity is not inherited, it's lived. Every time you speak up for what's right, mentor someone who's overlooked, or refuse to shrink to fit a room, you do what Jasmine did. You make space not just for yourself, but for the ones coming after you. And sometimes the greatest legacy isn't the trophy you take home, it's the door you leave open behind you.